Travels to the little-visited country of Eritrea and neighbouring Ethiopia to chart the rise of the kingdom of Aksum, described as one of the 4 greatest civilizations of the ancient world. Episode 5 of our landmark series, The History of Africa. A unique civilization arose in this part of East Africa, with what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea at its centre, the Kingdom of Aksum. In its heyday in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, it was described as one of the world's 4 greatest civilizations. The rulers of the Kingdom of Aksum controlled trade between Africa, Arabia and India, and according to local tradition, Aksum was founded by the son of the legendary Queen of Sheba and is home to the sacred Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopia is also the birthplace of coffee, an enduring gift to a grateful world. Northern Ethiopia, not far from the border with Eritrea. When we examine the history of this region, before, during and after the Kingdom of Aksum, it is the history of both Ethiopians and Eritreans today. The early morning mist in the highlands that make up some of the most dramatic landscape of both Ethiopia and Eritrea. This is southern Eritrea, which enjoys a long coastline on the Red Sea, a vital maritime route which helped establish this part of Africa as a hub of international trade throughout the millennia. Assalamu alaikum. This is one of the most beautiful, unspoilt stretches of the Red Sea coast. You can see from the clearness of the water that this is one of the last remaining unpolluted marine environments on the planet. I wonder what underwater secrets from the distant past it might harbour. To understand the rise of the ancient Kingdom of Aksum, we first have to delve further back into history to find out more about the people who laid the foundations for Aksum's greatness. We begin with the ancient land of Punt, which is in a region now known as the Horn of Africa. It was the ancient Egyptians who named it Punt land, which means the land of the gods. There's evidence the Egyptians traded with the people here some 3,500 years ago, arriving in their distinctive ships. There are records of voyages to Punt depicted in the temple of Queen Hatshepsut at Dar al-Bahri in Egypt. Punt was an important source of the gold that the Egyptians used to decorate their tombs. Jewelry, perfumes and oils also formed much of this trade. If you spend some time with the coastal inhabitants of Eritrea today, you soon learn that the people here have never broken with their centuries-old tradition of trading across the Red Sea. The fact that most people in this part of the country can speak Arabic is testament to their links with other cultures. This strategic position on the Red Sea coast meant people from many civilizations of the ancient world interacted with the local inhabitants. However, it was not just trade that made this part of Africa attractive. At its closest point, the Arabian Peninsula lies just 25 kilometers from here on the Eritrean coast. In the first millennium BC, settlers came across the Red Sea from Saba in southwestern Arabia, which is part of modern-day Yemen. They came as traders and farmers in search of fertile land. The people of Saba came to be known as the Sabaeans. They exchanged ideas and skills with the locals. For instance, they developed new irrigation techniques which boosted crop yields, and they shared knowledge of how to manage cattle, sheep, and goats. In time, a port was established at Adulis, which became one of the most important trading centers on the Red Sea, though its location today is no longer on the coast, but about 7 kilometers inland. These are some of the ruins of the port city of Adulis. It is now completely deserted, but this was once a thriving ancient port city, one of the greatest of its time. By the standards of the ancient world, the inhabitants would have enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. Some of the houses here would have been quite grand. These are the remains of a house in the city. Nobody lives in the area anymore, but we do know that Adulis was once a prosperous urban centre. Much of the land in Adulis remains unexcavated, but archaeologists here in Eritrea are working to uncover evidence of its former glory. Dr. Yosef Lipsikal is the director of the National Museum in the Eritrean capital Asmara, which has on display some of the artifacts found in Adulis. You have two small columns that were found in Adulis. What would they have been?
I think they would have been part of a palace, access to the entrance of the palace, which made of marble, together with other piece of architecture that was found in Adulis.
Looking around your lovely museum, very striking that you have this sphinx here. Where was that found, and what does it tell us about the indigenous culture of what is modern-day Eritrea?
The sphinx was found in the southern part of Eritrea, in a place called Adigramaten, which is dated 9th century BC. As you see, it's a figure of the head of a woman and the body of a lion. And under it, you have a Sabian inscription. The inscription talks about that it was a sacrificial stone. When you see the sphinx, you see the African component, the style of hair, the dressing. And this helps us to see, also to inspect the indigenous and endogenous culture. And it shows the relationship also with the neighboring countries, with Sudan and Nubia, because we know that there are many sphinxes in Egypt.
From Asmara, I'm traveling to the southwest of Eritrea to see more evidence of early civilizations in the country. High up in the mountains is a place rarely visited by outsiders, the site of Kaheto, which is near where the Sphinx in the museum was found. Rock art nearby shows that this area has been inhabited for some 7,000 years. The sheer number of archaeological remains spread over a wide area at Kaheto suggests that there was once an important site in this region in ancient times. Very little is known about the society that was based here, but it's believed that there was once an independent settlement that thrived in this part of Eritrea for hundreds of years. This is known as the Temple of Mariam Wairo, and so far it's the most important site to be excavated here at Kaheto. You can see the four columns, a mass of fallen stones and pillars, and the remains of a wall. It's believed to have been a place of worship. My guide Suleiman Omar, who accompanies me to Kaheto, wants to demonstrate to me with a stamp of his feet why archaeologists believe there is much more yet to be excavated at the site. So he's making this kind of hollow sound, and he's saying that underneath here there are believed to be some more archaeological remains that need to be excavated. Looks like you're doing a... Hey! It's a bit like a dance.
كلها 27 محل.
محل.
حتى هناك وهناك.
So Suleiman's telling me that across Kaheto there are like 27 sites where they're excavating, and really it does cover a big area of land. So clearly, at some stage, there must have been a society that really flourished here in this part of Eritrea, and it seems to me that it's a story that's being uncovered. Eritrea gained its independence in the early 1990s, so it's playing catch-up with tracing its own past. One gets the impression that excavations are being made all the time in Eritrea, and you're discovering more and more of your history.
Yes, and we're trying to find also an alternative history of Eritrea, together with the new findings, you know, of an indigenous and endogenous culture also. This helps us to construct the ancient history of Eritrea.
Eritrea, of course, was a part of the Aksumite kingdom, and a very critical part because it has the port of Massawa today, but Adulis in the ancient world, and that gave, of course, the Aksumite kingdom access to the Red Sea and vital trade routes.
Most of the sites, you know, which you find in Eritrea, as well as in Ethiopia, were, you know, Aksumite, you know. But we have found that there are about 70% of the Eritrean sites are pre-Aksumite. In Adulis, for example, we have found a pre-Aksumite site, which we call Adulite, because of the architecture, which is definitely different. So most of these sites, we think they are the precursors of the Aksumite civilization.
The various societies which lived both inland at Kaheto and on the coast at Adulis must have interacted with one another, even if they were distinct communities. Archaeologists and historians are trying to find the links between the two, but it's clear Kaheto would have been an important stop-off point on the caravan route to the sea. As time went on, these different groups of people mixed with the Sabaeans, who had migrated from across the Red Sea. The Sabaeans brought with them their own cultural practices, though of course they were also themselves influenced by the locals. Travel to the northeast of Ethiopia, and outside the city of Aksum at a site called Yeha, you find remains from this period. It's believed that around 500 BC there was a kingdom here called Damat. This monumental structure is believed to be the palace at Yeha, where the rulers of the kingdom of Damat lived. The palace has deteriorated badly, but you can still see the remains of square pillars. It was in this complex of buildings that a throne of carved limestone and a small statue of a seated figure were found. These are now both on display at the National Museum in Addis Ababa. Near the palace is a temple, which when I visit is being renovated. The Sabaeans spoke their own language, Sabaean, which in time mixed with the local tongue and gave rise to a new language called Gez. This evolved into the Amharic and Tigrayan of Ethiopia and Eritrea today, languages which with some modifications have been written since about 700 BC. This Ethiopian musician, Sete Zabegna, is singing in Amharic. The fusion of the Sabaean civilization and local cultures created the foundations for the emergence of one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world, the Kingdom of Aksum. What started as a group of independent kingdoms became one great empire. Its power was based on trade, and it lasted from around the 1st century AD for 1,000 years. Between 183 and 213 AD, the Aksumites crossed the Red Sea, invaded South Arabia, and conquered the coastal parts of the land of the Sabaeans. This showed how strong the kingdom had become. This is the major city in northern Ethiopia today that's called Aksum. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited places in Africa. And if you visit it, you immediately get a sense of its historic significance. The first recorded king of the Aksumite kingdom was Zoskales, but he's been totally eclipsed by an altogether more romantic tale of the kingdom's origins. Legend has it that the Queen of Sheba traveled from Aksum to Judah in the modern-day Middle East to visit King Solomon, renowned for his wisdom. According to the Bible, she arrived in Jerusalem with a large retinue, camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones. The story of Sheba and Solomon is related in a book called the Kebra Nagast, meaning the glory of the kings. It's a compilation of legends and traditions put together mostly in the late 13th and early 14th centuries by monks. Some accounts are historical and others purely derived from folklore, but many Ethiopians today accept it as historical fact. According to the Kebra Nagast, the Queen of Sheba gave birth to King Solomon's son, who became King Menelik I, and it was he who was the first ruler of the Aksumite kingdom. The powerful grip that the story of Sheba has on many is evident to this day. Princess Mariam, eldest granddaughter of the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, takes up the story of the Queen of Sheba, from whom she believes the Ethiopian royal family is descended.
To me, the Queen of Sheba presents a strong lady who was intelligent enough to realize she was young. Because she was young, she wanted to learn about Solomon's wisdom. And this shows her organization ability to take all those treasures to him and to get his advice on how to govern her country. From that angle, I admire her. I think she was forward-looking, in a sense, to learn, to educate herself, and I give her credit for all that.
About 30 kilometers outside of Aksum, at the site of Dungur, and seemingly in the middle of nowhere, you find clear remains of a substantial building dating back to the Aksumite era. According to local tradition, this stone structure behind me is the palace of the Queen of Sheba. In truth, it is more likely to be a castle dating back to the 7th century that was the home of a noble Aksumite family. But regardless of what the historians say, local guides here will tell any visitor that this is where the Queen of Sheba lived.
It's got a very special atmosphere. It takes you back, and you think of all the traveling she made and the way they brought back the wisdom from Solomon and passed it on from generation to generation.
If the Queen of Sheba was King Solomon's contemporary, she would have been alive 3 centuries before this castle at Dungur was built. But why let a discrepancy of just 300 years ruin a good story? Putting aside the debate of who actually lived in the palace, what do we know about it? The site here at Dungur is the finest example of Aksumite architecture still standing today. There are about 40 rooms in the castle. There's a kitchen with large brick ovens, rooms with bathing facilities, and all this shows that Aksum was a thriving urban centre of the ancient world. The castle at Dungur is believed to have been a nobleman's house, and it's not the only one. At the museum in Aksum, there's a model of the Ta'aka Mariam Palace, a square building with 4 towers set in a courtyard surrounded by many rooms.
This is the design of one of the Aksumite palaces. That's the model of Ta'aka Mariam Palace. It's dated to 5th up to 6th century AD. This palace is the biggest one in the history of the Aksumite kingdom.
And why can we not see the site? Because
for the time being is under excavation. That's why we prepare for the time being this model. But this was examined in 1906 by the German archaeologists. So at that time, they found, most of ground plus one, the half of the palace.
So tell me, the famous site at Dungur, which local tradition says is the palace of the Queen of Sheba, would it have looked like this?
Yes. Most of the Aksumite palaces already had this typical architectural design.
So there would have been bedrooms, bathrooms.
Yeah. Already.
Kitchens.
Yes, already it looks this one.
It would have been very impressive then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you believe that the site at Dungur is the palace of the Queen of Sheba?
Yes.
100%?
Yeah.
There's another part of Sheba's story which also has deep significance for Ethiopians and is as vibrant in their culture today as it has been throughout the centuries. Tradition holds that the first emperor of the Aksumite kingdom, Menelik I, the son of Sheba and Solomon, took from Jerusalem to Aksum one of the most sacred artifacts of Judaism, the Ark of the Covenant. I make my way along the wide streets of Aksum to the location by the city's main church where the Ark is supposed to be kept and guarded by a monk. Ethiopian Christians believe that locked away inside this small outbuilding behind me, just by the Church of Mary of Zion, is the sacred Ark of the Covenant brought here from Israel. According to biblical tradition, this contains the 10 commandments handed down to Moses by God. Inside, there lives a lone monk. He rarely ventures out, guarding at all times this sacred and precious treasure. Patriarch Abuna Matthias is the head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and he grants me a rare audience.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen.
I wanted to ask you about the legend of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, because, of course, it is believed that their son, Menelik, brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, where it is just by the Church of Miriam of Zion. Do you have no doubt that the Ark of the Covenant is in there?
No doubt, yes.
Have you, as the patriarch, seen it?
Our forefathers saw it, but I am not yet. But everyone accepted the presence of the Ark of the Covenant is in Aksum. And so we believe strongly that the Ark of the Covenant is here in Aksum.
In time, Christianity became an integral part of the Kingdom of Aksum, and its assumed possession of the Ark of the Covenant meant Aksum regarded itself as a religious hub. Christianity also allowed Aksum's rulers to bolster their authority. But just as with earlier civilizations, it was trade that provided them with their lifeblood.